Hello everybody, and welcome back to the channel. My name is Blair, or the Illuminati, and today we're talking about homework. Specifically, why it was invented, does it even serve a purpose, and why the hell does no one want to do it? I know my last educational video was a bit controversial for a few of you, and I want to make it clear that I'm not a teacher, educator, etc., not at least in the classical sense, and I don't have the benefit of an inside look at the school system. I do think the school system needs changing. I don't think many people would really argue with me on that, but I don't really blame the teachers. In fact, I'm quite far from it. Teachers, generally speaking, want their students to succeed, and this call to just teach for the test or for funding mindset isn't really their choice. It's just something that exists, and it's a necessary evil because of the system that's created. So I just want to make that super clear before we get into anything else today. But with that said, homework. I'm pretty sure we've all had it. I definitely hated it and had to do it out of obligation. So why? Through Education says that in 1 century AD, Pliny the Younger, an oratory teacher, supposedly invented homework by asking his followers to practice public speaking at home. It was to help them become more confident and fluent in their speeches. Other sources say Roberto Novalis of Venice, Italy, is often credited with having invented homework in 1095 or 1905, depending on your sources. Upon further inspection, however, he seems to be more of an internet myth than a historical personage. There are some sources out there that say he used homework in 1905 as a punishment for students, but not a single credible website or news article actually talks about him. In fact, the true individual responsible for inventing homework as we know today is Johann Gottlieb Fichte. Which, good lord, what a name, and I butchered that, and that's fine. Johann was a German philosopher and known to be the founding father of German nationalism. In the year 1814, the people of Prussia had lost their sense of nationalism. They are choosing to go back to their livelihood instead of serving the country after war. Johann came up with the concept of Volksschule and Realschule. Volksschule was a mandatory education system of 9 years, which was similar to primary and lower secondary school. Realschule was a secondary school system reserved for the aristocrats. Aristocrats, God, I've been watching way too much Disney. Aristocrats. Homework was part of Volksschule to demonstrate the nation's power on common people and stir up a sense of nationalism. This system was slowly adopted all over Europe, although some countries like Finland continued with their system of education and refused to impose homework on the students. In 1843, Horace Mann, the secretary of the Massachusetts Board of Education then, went to Europe and visited the schools in Prussia. On his return, he presented his findings in the 7th annual reports of the board. These reports were reprinted all over the United States and led to the reform of the American education system. And again, for those of you who have seen my other video about why the school system is trash the way it is, you most certainly have heard the name Horace Mann, so I'm not entirely surprised to see that he makes a reappearance in today's video as well. However, it's not as if Horace Mann brought homework to the States and everyone instantly accepted and adopted the idea. Homework actually has quite a history of being controversial. Most of this controversy arose after laws in the late 19th and early 20th century passed, mandating school attendance for children and teenagers, at least here in the US anyway. Parents started to experience and were still trying to figure out what family life would look like with so much of their child's time gone. Parents argued that kids should be outdoors and that their bodies were at risk of damage if they were stressed by overwork. Change doesn't come easy after all, and this was clearly a large adjustment for many American families. One man known for being one of homework's biggest critics was Edward Bok. In January 1900, Edward Bok wrote a scathing editorial in Ladies' Home Journal about homework in America with the headline, "A National Crime at the Feet of American Parents." The child is made to study far, far beyond his physical strength, and consequently his mental good, Bok pronounced. The elementary and junior high school student shouldn't even need to tote books home from school because he should be outside with his friends between dismissal and dinner, and after that, he should sleep. To rob a child of a playtime which belongs to him is a rank injustice, Bok argued. No child under 15 years of age should be given any home study whatever by his teachers. Bok continued to write articles along this vein for some time, even stating that the problems were worse than he thought when more parents and teachers wrote into the journal telling him about the stress and heavy workload put on their children. By 1901, the year after Bach's articles ran in the journal, 2/3 of American urban school districts had restricted homework, Peter Stearns writes in his History of Parental Anxiety. In testimony he gave before Congress in 1900, William Torrey Harris, the U.S. Commissioner of Education, said that homework was a prolific source of abuse and ought to be rigidly limited so that the child does not study more than 2 hours per day out of school after he is 12 years old, and not any out of school before that time. These anti-homework efforts were most effective in California, where the state legislature mandated in 1901 that no child under 15 should have any homework at all. For decades, this opinion was pretty much the norm. Homework was too stressful, children went to bed with it on their minds at night, and children with large homework burdens were miserable. Obviously, I can't vouch for every parent in the early 20th century, but the anti-homework movement was going strong. Although very few districts abolished homework completely, many abolished it in grades K to 8. It was practically universal that no child in 3rd grade or lower should have homework, and for elementary and secondary schools, it was typically given in small amounts. So, what changed? Homework was atypical throughout the 30s and 40s. Why did opinions reverse? Simple: competition. After the Soviet Union launched the Sputnik 1 satellite in 1957, everything became about progress. The trend towards less homework was quickly reversed as the United States became obsessed with competing with the Russians. Fearful that children were unprepared to compete in a future that would be increasingly dominated by technology, school officials, teachers, and parents saw homework as a means for accelerating children's acquisition of knowledge. The homework problem was reconceived as part of a national crisis. The US was losing the Cold War because Russian children were smarter. That is, they were working harder and achieving more in school. The new discourse pronounced too little homework an indicator of the dismal state of American schooling. A commitment to heavy homework loads was alleged to reveal seriousness of purpose in education. Homework became an instrument of national defense policy. And people began to feel that the US was falling behind. Within just a few years, pro-homework opinions dominated. Schools reversed their anti-homework policies, and the social activities dominating children's lives were seen as unacceptable. Life magazine ran a competitive article showing an American teenager dancing, smiling, out with friends, and a Russian teenager doing science experiments in a quiet parlor. The public response was clear. If the US was going to win the Cold War, then American children needed to keep up. However, the US mindset didn't stay this way either. By the late 1960s and early 1970s, in the midst of the Vietnam War and the Civil Rights Movement, a counterculture emerged that questioned the status quo in literally every aspect of personal and political life. A popular book, Teaching as a Subversive Activity, attacked traditional methods of what was labeled the educational establishment. Indicative of the times, a new debate emerged over homework and other educational activities. The anti-homework arguments were reminiscent of the progressive arguments of the early 20th century. Again, homework was seen as a symptom of too much pressure on students to achieve. In 1966, the National Education Association issued a statement advocating for not more than an hour of homework a day and that homework be limited to 4 nights a week. Personally, I'm more in line with this middle ground mindset. The anti-homework mindset isn't completely healthy because practicing what a student's learned in class can be helpful. We'll get into how homework is used today and the pros and cons in just a moment. I won't pretend that homework has zero merit, but I agree that there should be practical limits. A kid should have time to be a kid, to meet with friends, and to pursue and practice and learn their own hobbies and interests. Of course, there's the argument to be made that many kids are overscheduled these days with sports, cheer practice, swimming, music lessons, dance lessons, you name it. And I'm not a parent, obviously, unless we're counting Casper, but I think that there's got to be a balance. A balance of education, after-school activities, and free time for a child to choose what it is that they want to be doing. If homework is so overwhelming that it regularly cuts into family time or a hobby, then I agree that it's probably too much. Anyway, that love-hate relationship with homework began to shift once again in the 1980s. In 1983, a study, A Nation at Risk, became the first major report by the government attempting to prove that the purported inadequacies of our schools and our students were responsible for the troubles of the U.S. economy. The report claimed that there was a rising tide of mediocrity in schools and that a movement for academic excellence was needed. A Nation at Risk planted the seed of the idea that school success was responsible for economic success. Anti-homework and pro-homework views have shifted over the years, to say the least. The standards are raised, then lowered as parents say their kids need more time to be children, then raised when we're competing with other nations or an economy. You get the picture. The pro-homework trend continued until the 90s, then in the late 90s the tide turned against it again. Now the pendulum seems to be swinging back towards the pro side, according to ASCD.org. Again, I'm not saying eliminate homework, there needs to be a balance, but some of the reasoning behind pro-homework beliefs doesn't always stack up. Homework isn't the only way to teach a student responsibility, and more homework doesn't equal a better curriculum. Research seems to answer that question. Does homework help children learn? With "it depends." So an all-or-nothing approach hardly seems to be the answer. But then, what does it depend on? What are the pros and cons? Let's get into that now and try to tackle the question, does homework even work? Obviously, this is a really broad question, so bear with me here. My answer is still, it depends. I'm sure homework works for some people and not for others. We all learn differently, and that's fine. But I want to talk about who homework works for and a bit about why. In one Atlantic article called The Cult of Homework, they state that a 2015 study found that kindergartners who researchers agree shouldn't do any homework spend an average of 25 minutes a night on it. Hillsborough, California, an affluent suburb of San Francisco, is one district that has changed its ways. The district, which includes 3 elementary schools and a middle school, worked with teachers and convened panels of parents in order to come up with a homework policy that would allow students more unscheduled time to spend with their families or to play. In August 2017, it rolled out an updated policy which emphasized that homework should be meaningful and banned due dates that fell on the day after a weekend or a break. The first year was a bit bumpy, says Luann Carlomagno, the district superintendent. She says the adjustment was at times hard for the teachers, some of whom who had been doing their job in a similar fashion for a quarter of a century. Parents' expectations were also an issue. Carlomagno says they took the time to realize that it was okay to not have an hour of homework for a second grader. That was new. This seems like the opposite problem we've seen in the past. Before, parents were worried about their children having too much homework, and we saw articles advocating for its ban. Now, on the other hand, parents weren't familiar with their young children spending so little time on it. Researchers also tend to fall in one or two camps when it comes to homework. Some, like Harris Cooper, a professor of psychology and neuroscience at Duke University, say that homework isn't overly burdensome for the typical American kid. He references a 2014 Brookings Institution report that found little evidence the homework load had increased and that onerous amounts are rare. According to Alfie Kahn, squarely in Camp 2, most of the conclusions listed in the previous 3 paragraphs are questionable. Kahn, the author of The Homework Myth: Why Our Kids Get Too Much of a Bad Thing, considers homework to be a reliable extinguisher of curiosity and has several complaints with the evidence that Cooper and others cite in favor of it. Kahn notes, among other things, that Cooper's 2006 meta-analysis doesn't establish causation and that its central correlation is based on children's potentially unreliable self-reporting of how much time they spend doing homework. Kahn also takes issue with the way achievement is commonly assessed. If all you want is to cram kids' heads with facts for tomorrow's test that they're going to forget by next week, yeah, if you give them more time to make them do the cramming at night, that could raise the scores, he says. But if you're interested in kids who know how to think or enjoy learning, then homework isn't merely ineffective, but counterproductive. I do disagree with this teaching for the test idea, as I've already made pretty clear, but is all homework related to tests? Well, not necessarily. Some homework, like Mike Simpson, head of the Stone Independent School in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, believes should be exploratory. In other words, worksheets, repetitive math homework, the type of homework I remember doing and hating, has been done away with at their school. Teachers say that when they ask students to take 20 minutes for pleasure reading, or if they put out a bucket for kids to draw their assignments for them in some variety, or even if they allow their students to manage their own class time, that's shown the best results. Some students, one teacher says, will willingly spend time on assignments at home, whether because they're particularly engaged, because they prefer to do some deeper thinking outside of school, or because they needed to spend time in class that day preparing for a test the following period. They're making meaningful decisions about their time that I don't think education really ever gives students to experience, nor the practice of doing, the teacher concluded. Time management is such an important task. If students are overworked with hours and hours of homework, then I'm not really sure they'd be learning time management either. They would just be surviving overly difficult workloads. Seeing how these different teachers say they adapt and the results gathered from it, it really is interesting to me. Based on this article alone, I'd say homework works depending on how it's given, but what about the other sources and other research articles? One Forbes article states that research has been unable to prove that homework improves student performance and goes into further depth about why it doesn't work. They say there's something called retrieval practice, which means trying to recall information you've already learned. The optimal time to engage in retrieval practice is not immediately after you've acquired information, but after you've forgotten it a bit. Like perhaps after school. A homework assignment could require students to answer questions about what was covered in class that day without consulting their notes. Research has found that retrieval practice and similar learning strategies are far more powerful than simply rereading or reviewing material. It's not so much homework in general not working, but the types of homework that are given. Another objection Forbes brings up is that some children have greater advantages, whether that's internet access, well-educated parents, parents that can afford tutors, their own space to work, the list goes on. If homework isn't reliant on these factors, but the simpler 20 minutes of pleasure reading that we've seen implemented, this could help level out the playing field, so to speak. The National Education Association advocates for the 10-minute rule, 10 minutes for first graders, 20 minutes for second graders, all the way up to 120 minutes a night for 12th graders. Some teachers advocate for no homework whatsoever because, as they say, it doesn't tell them what their students are learning. Again, I feel that this depends on the teacher, the subject, and the student. There's too many variables at play here to give a one-size-fits-all type answer. And again, this is a very emotionally charged topic, which can make finding middle ground that much more difficult. And again, it doesn't help when even the research is mixed, as so much as it depends on where the study is done, which communities, etc. A Stanford researcher found that too much homework can negatively affect kids, especially their lives away from school where family, friends, and activities matter. Our findings on the effects of homework challenge the traditional assumption that homework is inherently good, wrote Dennis Pope, a senior lecturer at the Stanford Graduate School of Education, and a co-author of a study published in the Journal of Experimental Education. The researchers used survey data to examine perceptions about homework, student well-being, and behavioral engagement in a sample of 4,317 students from 10 high-performing high schools in upper-middle-class California communities. Along with the survey data, Pope and her colleagues used open-ended questions to explore the students' views on homework. Median household exceeds 90,000 in these communities, and 93% of students went on to college either 2-year or 4-year. Students in these schools average about 3.1 hours of homework each night. These findings address how current homework practices in privileged, high-performing schools sustain students' advantage in competitive climates yet hinder learning, full engagement, and well-being, Pope said. Pope and her colleagues found that too much homework can diminish its effectiveness and even be counterproductive. This study reports great stress, with less than 1% of students saying homework wasn't a stressor, reductions in health like sleep deprivation, less time for friends, family, and extracurricular pursuits. But what the Times call the most comprehensive research on homework to date, as of 2016 when the article was written anyway, has found evidence of a positive correlation between homework and student achievement. Students who did homework performed better in school, according to Harris-Cooper's study, the same Harris-Cooper we mentioned earlier who Kahn, the author of the homework myth, has argued against. But yet another source, Edutopia, says that the problem can be a number of subjects a student has too. Teachers in middle and high school should be aware of how much homework other teachers are assigning. It may seem reasonable to assign 30 minutes of daily homework, but across 6 subjects, that's 3 hours, far above a reasonable amount for even a high school senior. Psychologist Maurice Elias has also seen a common mistake. Individual teachers create homework policies that in aggregate can overwhelm students. He suggests that teachers work together to develop a school-wide homework policy and make it a key topic of back-to-school night and the first parent-teacher conferences of the school year. And again, other articles argue that it should be abolished completely and it is the greatest extinguisher of curiosity ever invented. Needless to say, no 2 sources I found were the same. No one agreed. I can't deny that homework plays a stressful part in a student's life, let alone when personal issues come up for said student. But at the same time, I'm not sure I'm in the get rid of homework completely camp either. Some say that it's the 2006 study from Cooper that it's old and outdated, but there is still some merit in learning at home. Even if a child or young adult isn't doing a worksheet, blending learning and fun, as cheesy as it sounds, is important, and I think we can all at least agree there a little bit. Personally, I really like the idea of more open-ended assignments or more flexible worksheets, applying math problems to daily life, writing a short story, maybe rebuilding a trebuchet for physics, you get the point. On a little bit of a personal note here, when I was learning percentages as a kid, I remember my mom would make me calculate the tip whenever we would go out to eat. And I'm not gonna lie, tipping is probably the most I use percentages for in my adult life now, so long as there isn't a little recommended amount slip on the receipt. But that's honestly the most I've ever really used it IRL. The reality is I definitely suck at math. That's why my major was not anything to do with math, and that's why in some of my videos you'll probably see math mistakes, because I do try my darndest, but math was never my thing. But anyways, guys, I know there's no black and white answer to this, and usually I can provide you some kind of conclusion by the end of each of my videos, but today that just isn't the case. The topic of homework is a controversial one, and I'm not exaggerating when I say that literally no two sources of mine were in complete and total agreement with any other source that I had. And I often find a variety of perspectives and sources when I'm doing my research for a particular topic. If you guys have ever looked at my sourcing list in any of my videos, it's usually a minimum of 30 sources, and I think we've gone as high as maybe 60 to 80 sources for some videos. But you guys know that there's a lot of work and research that go into these videos, and I couldn't really find two sources that agreed on anything to a T. It was the weirdest thing ever. So I'm sure if I were a teacher or had a child that this would definitely affect my opinion as an outsider looking in, depending on what I was reading especially, but I think a middle ground is most in order here. Seniors, especially those that are stressed enough with college applications and AP tests, shouldn't really have more than 3 hours of homework a night. And again, I don't blame the teachers here because many of them are required to follow a teaching for the test curriculum, which isn't necessarily going to work for everyone, and it gives teachers less freedom in the classroom. More on that in my previous education video, though. So with all of that being said, that's where I'm going to end today's video, and I really hope you guys enjoyed it. So let me know what you learned down in the comments section. And if you liked the video, make sure to hit that like button. If you guys are new to the channel, make sure to hit that subscribe button. If you want even more content from me, you can pop open my description box. Again, you'll see my sourcing, all of my social media, second channels that I work with, and all of the wonderful creative people that also work with me to help make these videos come to life. So thank you all for watching today's video. Love you guys, and I'll see you in the next one. Bye!